McCarthyism is still in the DNA of America's political and media class. The fear that if you challenge the prevailing orthodoxy narrative, the groupthink, so to speak, leave the pack, you'll have your patriotism, if not your sanity, questioned. You will be marginalized, vilified, controversialized. You will be called an apologist. Now, these one-sided media narratives have, with astonishingly few exceptions, gone unchallenged. There's also a factor which can't be discounted, which is a strong and residual anti-Russian Cold War sentiment, certainly among neocons, but also liberal hawks. And this infuses the mainstream media, what defines the parameters of permissible debate. But this anti-Russian sentiment has been pumped up because Russia, for many, including progressives, has come to mean Putin. Where is the sense of a political landscape, political struggles in Russia? And this is what I'm trying to talk to people about in the United States now, because I think we are at a turning point. The decision, the debate about shipping weapons to Ukraine has triggered more attention. People are suddenly saying, what? And so there's an opening here. And that leads toward a discussion of a new Cold War. Cold War closes off space for dissent. And the danger of empowering war parties in all countries is something we're at terrible risk of.
So we're very conscious of the fact that sending large amounts of weapons to Ukraine could perhaps instigate a much worse situation with Russia. And that's something that I think we really want to avoid. But that said, we do have obligations to Ukraine under a pact that we signed with them in 1994, the Budapest Memorandum.
Why did there seem to be so little dissenting voices from the new Cold War rhetoric in the American media landscape if we indeed had a free and independent press?
This is a special system.
The answer seemed to come from the inception of TV news media itself, which saw its birth during the very first opening salvos of the Cold War in the late 1940s. The framework was based on free enterprise and capitalism, the widely accepted antidote to Soviet communism. TV news media throughout the Cold War, while being allegedly free and independent, managed to broadcast a lockstep and hysterical propagandistic anti-Russian narrative day in and day out.
These documents were fed out of the State Department by communists who were employees of that department.
But how was this possible back then if they weren't being overtly censored, at least not most of the time? The fear of secret communists, Russian spies, radiation, nuclear bombs permeated the atmosphere of how television defined our lives in the 1950s and 60s. Modern right-wing paranoia punditry was born out of this era, starting with Joe McCarthy. There wasn't an overt conspiracy by the US government that forced journalists to fearmonger the American public.
Would the atom bomb be the answer to the Chinese hordes? President Truman said that it was under consideration.
Or to paint America in a favorable light. Instead, it was something more insidious. Most journalists at the time felt they played a role in helping the United States fight communism. It instilled them with a sense of nationalism.
News is big news on ABC TV. Whenever things happen, wherever things happen, ABC's expanded worldwide news staff is on the spot. On ABC, you get the news fast and you get it straight.
CBS Television presents a special report.
They weren't being forced to do this. They saw it as a necessary and patriotic duty. And while the CIA has admitted to planting journalists in various media organizations, most of the pro-American propaganda eventually evolved, coming in the form of anonymous officials leaking information to reporters. But if it became impossible to tell if the news we were reading and watching was being filtered down from the government via loyal conduits in the media industry, then how are we able to distinguish the truth from fiction, or reality from propaganda? If a campaign to teach us that a foreign country is the enemy succeeds, does that mean that it was true? Or does that mean the American public was successfully brainwashed? This was the paradox that was laid out before us in the Cold War, and since the system and the foundations that our media was based on were never actually changed.
In 1948, when Congress decided we ought to have an overseas information program on a more or less permanent basis, Mr. Allen was put in charge.
We're still facing that paradox today.
Why is it that everything the other side says is propaganda, while we call what we say information?
Lemley, the word propaganda has taken on a very bad connotation. It was originally a perfectly good word.
The only difference is that today, the propaganda and the propagandists have become more sophisticated. And even fewer corporations control the bulk of all the media. How can TV provide a public service or a public good when corporations ultimately control the message?
Special introduction by Walter Cronkite.
A formidable enemy.
And countless journalists are willing to let themselves be used as conduits for government propaganda because they know it will ensure them a successful career.
The area we're going to bomb is only about 70 miles from Da Nang Air Base.
1, 2, 3, 4, we dropped our bombs and now a tremendous G-load.
Ahead lie even higher casualties, a point that every GI and every general in Vietnam is acutely aware of. Sealing off the besieged camp with a ring of deadly fire.
Mr. Allen, don't the Soviets in their propaganda attempt to show also that Americans are opposed to all the colored races?
Yes, I do.
The American Negro, the invisible man, breaks out in a scream. Look at me, look at me.
It's going to sound, but 42,000 men here are watching.
The idea of World War III in the modern age seems far-fetched.
Let me share with you a vision of the future which offers hope. It is that we embark on a program to counter the awesome Soviet missile threat.
But in the Reagan era, America experienced the peak of what corporate entertainment and government propaganda could do with that fear.
Didn't work, huh? Now it will.
The themes of Cold War paranoia and nuclear winter saturated our increasingly sophisticated entertainment culture during the Reagan era. This trickled down to consumers in the form of home computing and video game consoles. The relationship between capitalism and Cold War militarism became even more convoluted. Then the Berlin Wall fell. America celebrated the prospects of world peace. Russia was our friend now. For the first time in 45 years, people breathed a sigh of relief. Of course, America still found excuses to wage war in foreign countries. By no means did the US draw back its military as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But for many years, things just felt somewhat peaceful again. We could almost relax. That's what we thought. But that all changed on 9/11. The neoconservatives helped create an atmosphere where Americans became paralyzed by fears of terrorist attacks. During the Cold War, Americans were paralyzed by fears of nuclear Armageddon. If the American public could be simultaneously paralyzed and terrified by both,
at Raytheon,
the war makers and profiteers might not encounter any resistance at all. Did the neocons finally get their way?
Into the next century, Raytheon, where quality starts with fundamentals.
Is this what they wanted all along? As the stakes got higher and higher, our president wasn't telling us that the only thing to fear was fear itself.
I think it's fair to say that I'm not in as good shape as you. Hopefully I'll be able to keep up.
He was hardly telling us anything at all, and instead allowed the hysterical media echo chamber to dwarf the White House message.
fight against Vladimir Putin's Russian military aggression is about to get harder.
But even with the TV and media ratcheting up fear levels about Russia, there was an odd calm among the general public. People went about their daily lives.
2, 1.
Maybe it was good that people were distracted or busy. Because if you looked closely, the world stood on the edge of a knife, and the person chosen to hold our hands through the turbulent time was claiming to be a bipartisan emissary, the unassailable diplomat, who always seemed robotically calm in the face of pressure.
Victoria Nuland, who is Assistant Secretary of State.
Even if we should be afraid of what the future held, her calculating ease and making diffusive remarks gave away virtually no tells. We only knew that if she didn't seem scared, we thought we shouldn't be scared either. Victoria was stationed in the Soviet Union by the US State Department as a young woman when the Berlin Wall fell. But was she personally invested in a Europe whole free and at peace? Did she want to reactivate the Cold War like her husband? Behind the scenes, the tension seemed to be reaching epic proportions. The next step would be equipping the Ukrainian government with US weaponry to fend off the Russian separatists.
Again, that would come up in any discussion group in Washington, or I dare say anywhere else now, whether the United States and other allies should be providing defensive weapons, but lethal weapons, to Ukrainian forces.
First, let me say that the United States has provided significant security support to Ukraine throughout this crisis, almost $120 million worth. With regard to whether you take that to a more lethal level, clearly this would constitute an escalation on the battlefield. Would it be responded by further escalation on the part of Russia, such that the whole thing becomes more bloody, more violent, and those who suffer most are the people of Ukraine? So that is the debate.
Perhaps being emotionally unreadable was the best way to let us know that American willpower in the new century was an immovable object. No matter who is president, no matter who took office, we'll never back down, no matter what.